Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. So today we have a really exciting session with AWS and SentinelOne, and we're going to talk about building generative AI solutions for security operations and really looking at generating AI-powered security insights and the different ways in which we can do that. We are going to start with a little bit about the AWS side and AWS generative AI solutions, and then we'll move into Purple AI, which is a new release from SentinelOne, do an overview there and a quick demo. And then we're going to just kind of talk about, what are the build versus buy key considerations and comparing those two to each other, and have a quick discussion there and answer some questions at the end if you all have them. Definitely throughout the presentation, ask questions in the Q&A box. Our speakers would love to hear from you. And I'm going to hand it over to Jonathan to start us off with introductions.
Hey everybody, glad to be here today. My name is Jonathan Nguyen. I am a principal security architect. I've been with AWS for about 4.5 years now. My primary focus is primarily within threat detection, incident response, and I help our large enterprise customers determine, what's the best security strategy, how do you leverage AWS services securely, and then build kind of POC type of solutions, which we'll go over later today.
Thanks, Jonathan. Hey, everyone. My name is Eli Khan, VP of Product here at SentinelOne, focusing on cloud security and AI ML. And quick backstory to this webinar. Jonathan and I used to work together at AWS. We've worked on a number of blogs together over the years. And I saw a blog that Jonathan put out fairly recently on building generative AI solutions using AWS services. And since Purple is built on AWS services as well, I thought it would be a great webinar for us to get together, get the band back together, and talk about generative AI from our different perspectives.
Thanks, Eli. Great to see everyone. Mike McGrail. I am a manager on our field solutions engineering team. So the technical resource through all things through POC evaluations and for customers looking at our data lake platform, which supports Purple AI and all the good stuff that we'll see through the webinar today. Jonathan, over to you, sir.
Awesome, thanks. Yeah, so I'll be talking through in terms of a AWS native generative AI solution using just AWS technologies, which you can provision yourself, tailor, customize, and so forth. Next slide, please. So in terms of why even build some type of generative AI solution, and the one thing, Security Lake was released last year, and it's a great component in terms of normalizing, aggregating data, making it something that can be even consumable. But from that perspective, there are also mechanisms in terms of, well, once I have a data lake, how do I effectively investigate and analyze that data? And that's one component. And now with the introduction of generative AI being utilized, it just can make security analysts' jobs that much more efficient in terms of how they do either threat hunting or analytical components. And so seeing this as an opportunity in terms of, well, why would I even build some type of POC component? And we've got the tools within the AWS realm, and the big thing about it is, well, you can tailor it based off of specific use case, right? And so what we are about to go over is a mechanism in terms of, hey, how can you quickly deploy an AWS solution using things like SageMaker, Bedrock, and Security Lake in terms of the data within your ecosystem. And some of the use cases that I was originally kind of intending is, SageMaker notebooks, if you all haven't really used it before, is a mechanism to quickly typically use your desired programming language. Mine is Python, like a lot of other folks. But how do I kind of quickly test and iterate in terms of using Python, but interacting with other AWS services across the board? Somebody says they're not seeing the slides.
I think we should be good.
Okay, just making sure. So using SageMaker notebooks to do things like a threat hunting capability in terms of, well, the initial component was machine learning, right? Creating your own model, doing things like training your model and training it based off of your data, right? Challenge being is that creating your own model, there were a lot of different hurdles that you'd have to kind of go through. Introducing things like large language models that are hosted within Amazon Bedrock, where now you can use a model that's kind of been tested, vetted, and the list of models continually grows. The other use case in terms of, why I wanted to build something that was native to AWS was there are multiple different types of use cases and how you might use generative AI to increase your overall security posture, right? Maybe you're focused on looking at OT security. Maybe you're looking primarily in terms of endpoints. Maybe you want to specify, playbook recommendations. The sky's kind of the limit, right? And every customer is different in terms of how they are interacting with that data. So seeing all of that, right, the idea of building a generative AI solution was identifying the art of the possible, right? Sometimes it's difficult to conceptualize things if somebody hasn't built it. So I wanted to take this opportunity to say, okay, well, this is kind of really cool stuff. How would I construct something in terms of a easy use case where we're starting to talk about threat hunting, right? We do threat hunting kind of day in, day out. Even if you're not threat hunting, if you're in the security realm, you're probably doing it without knowing. So one of the predominant challenges that we had prior to Security Lake was, well, we've got data in 15 different places in 15 different formats, and doing analysis on that is, well, I've got to now remember how to do analysis in all of those places, all of those schemas. So Security Lake really introduced this aspect of, well, I can consolidate my data, I can utilize the OCSF schema to get all of the data in speaking the same language. And in terms of this solution, some of the prerequisites was to have Security Lake stood up. And ideally, you are doing analysis, you're having applications in a different application or account outside of where you have Security Lake. So this solution is based off of having the deployment in a separate account that is a subscriber. Right. So within Security Lake, having a subscriber account, being able to query your Athena data, right? So you can look at the entire AWS ecosystem in terms of your security data, because you can do things like your roll-up region within Security Lake, the same concepts in terms of delegated administration within Security Lake. So all of that can be done from a specific account. And from there, under the hood, Security Lake is sharing things out using lake formation. It's really to make it an easier way to control access in terms of what data that you want to kind of provide for your subscribers. So once you have all of that stood up, then this solution is actually deploying things like a SageMaker domain, which is, we'll get into that a little bit later, but a user profile within SageMaker domains, and effectively it's an IDE for your either your data scientists, your security analysts, what have you, right? So depending on comfort level with notebooks, right, part of it is having this mechanism to kind of test, to iterate, to interact with other AWS services. And within the notebook, you are no different than looking at a command prompt, right, where you're making API calls out to other services, whether that is Athena to run a query, whether that is code commit to update or pull in notebooks, or if it's Bedrock, right, to utilize a specific large language model for your use case. And the benefit of using a notebook is, well, as we are still relatively new within the generative AI kind of space, especially using it for increasing your security posture and tailoring it to your use case, being able to plug and play, change things out to understand, well, what works for you in terms of actually using generative AI for increasing, again, security posture. So what we have here is primarily this construct of using SageMaker, and the idea is to test quickly, right? Because in terms of, hey, I've got this model, it's not really giving me good responses, right? I start asking it questions, it gives me recommendations for where I should take vacations, and that's not really what I'm looking for, right? I'm looking for, how do I investigate this specific finding, this alert, or any type of threat investigation. So with that being said, we can go into this solution as it's been deployed. And let me share my screen. All right. All right, so at this point, right, the solution's been deployed, prerequisites have kind of been set up. I've got Security Lake, I've got my sources coming in, and now I want to get into my notebook, right? So SageMaker Domain provides a mechanism to have multiple people access a SageMaker notebook and minimize how much you might step on toes, right? And the reason, if y'all haven't kind of worked in it, is each user profile is going to have access to this, their own kind of space to work. So if I think about it from a security perspective, or a security/data scientist perspective, is, well, I want to work, I might want to investigate, but I want to do it within my own space so I don't overwrite something that you were doing. So if I click this open, what it's going to do is open this this notebook. You'll see, if you've really everyone hear me and see my screen okay? Just doing a mic check.
Yes, I can hear and see your thing. Okay.
All right. So from here, what we're looking at right now are notebooks. The easiest way to explain a notebook, if folks here haven't really worked with SageMaker domains or notebooks, is think about this as a script that you're running, right? But you're actually not running the entire script like a Lambda function, where you are saying, hey, invoke this Lambda function. The good thing about a notebook is these are like specific cells where I can run, do what I need to. I can change things out pretty quickly. And from there, I can see what my results are, right? Again, that's really the benefit of doing this in a notebook, is as I'm testing, as I'm iterating, maybe I make specific changes here. And so this notebook, if we remember back into the architecture diagram, is going to actually interact with Security Lake via Athena, right? So I'm getting data from Athena. I'm querying it here. Well, I'm actually going to get...
for folks that aren't familiar with Athena, could you just remind folks what Athena is?
Yeah, sure. So Athena is a managed service where you will have databases and tables with a backend. It's something like S3, where you can interact with that via SQL. So SQL is a language in terms of where all of us are probably somewhat familiar. And that Athena service, the managed service, is integrated with the Security Lake S3 bucket. And please, if there's anything else I am kind of saying that you need a refresher or is confusing, please let me know. So again, I won't go through this line by line. This is actually all open source. So if anybody is interested, there's a blog out here on this, and it's also all open source for you to use. So here I'm establishing my environment, right? So within the notebook, it's literally just using Python 3, which is like interacting from a CLI perspective. And I need to do things like requirements, right? Again, very similar to a Lambda function. And I've installed this appropriate packages. And so for this use case, I am going to use LangChain. LangChain, for folks, we get into this kind of data scientist type speak, but ultimately think about Bodo 3 as a framework where you are getting that and being able to instantiate different Bodo 3 classes. So this is the primary mechanism that I'm going to be using in terms of interacting with the large language model. So within this notebook, I can actually press play, which runs the specific cells. And all I'm doing is things like interacting with Athena, saying, hey, I want to, if I call on Athena, I want it to call Security Lake. I want it to go have the outputs in a specific bucket. So in this section, I am defining the large language model. With Bedrock, there are a number of models that is continually growing. At the time of developing this solution, we chose Claude, and now version 3 is out, but Claude version 2 is out, and that was giving us the best responses. So within it here, we're interacting with Bedrock to say, hey, let's go use, let's interact with this large language model in terms of our interactions. And I will, in the interest of time, kind of go through playing of these cells, and all I'm really doing is setting things up. There's this construct within when you interact with large language models, you're using an agent. Think about a travel agent, right? You're giving it instructions saying, this is what I want to do. These are the specific tasks I want to take, and it's up to that agent to do things like give you good response, right? And so in this situation, all I'm doing is giving the agent a set of tools. And again, this is all within the LangChain framework. And then I'm telling it, hey, I gave you these tools, go ahead and use them, and I want you to help me in terms of understanding what you are saying. And you're seeing here, so what we're seeing now is this culmination of I've specified my large language model. I've created the Athena connection. Again, remember, Athena is just SQL queries to the backend of S3, which is my data lake. And then from there, I can start asking it natural language questions. So something could be, what data sources are available? Chain run. So that's just a warning for deprecation. Again, it's using different packages, but you see here that it is going through using a table and saying, well, what am I actually finding? So from that perspective, it finished its query and said, oh, hey, by the way, these are your data sources within Security Lake. You can now run queries based off of, let's kind of focus on Security Hub, because that is all Elon and I talked about when he was at AWS. What are the 5 accounts that have the most Security Hub findings, right? Where do I want to start? What do I want to look at? And again, you'll see that the reason in terms of this integration is looking at, well, what tool do I want to use? What is my thought process? And you see here that it's kind of doing a lot of the work for me in terms of these SQL queries, right? It's creating an external table. And ultimately, it is making this thought process of, oh, hey, I found the schema of the table that I should be looking at. And you know what? Let me go ahead and also create the SQL query, because remember, this is interacting with Athena.
Hey, Jonathan, quick question. Sorry to interrupt, but quick question on what you just showed there. So, in generative AI, there's the concept of zero-shot prompting, where you're just asking the LLM to do something without giving it examples. And curious, like in this case, was that basically a zero-shot prompt? Was there any other prompting that you did to the LLM there besides, say, show me the top 5 accounts?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it depended on the question that you asked. So for something like show me or what accounts have the most security up findings, what I found is, well, that's not actually that difficult of a question. And if you understand OCSF, I mean, there's this concept of conditional fields or nested fields. And so for simple questions, there were minimal prompting that we had to do. And for those that are not aware, in terms of what Eli is asking is like within this agent, you know, you're giving it tools and you're also giving it instructions in terms of, you know, pay attention to SQL queries generated. What we found is that depending on the query, we had to kind of say, hey, don't use a colon, right? An example is because, well, if you did a colon and it's actually passing it to Athena, it became something where it's not a valid SQL query, right? And so to answer your question, it depends on the complexity of the query. There were some things that we had to overcome and kind of tell the agent based off of what we found, do this or don't do this.
Got it.
Okay, so it went through, did a SQL query, found the top 5 accounts with security up findings. This one's got a number of them by design, and over 1 million findings. So from here, typically you think about from a threat hunter's perspective, I'm now looking at, well, all right, so these findings, these accounts, maybe I should try and focus on these accounts by looking at specific API calls that I might think are interesting, right? And I can keep going through and looking at this, but I also want to give time to Eli and Mike. And so again, here's the specific components that we're seeing. I've got these other playbooks or notebooks that I ran. And so things like, you know, running these queries, you see here, it's not all rosy. I will say that, right? There are things in terms of, well, sometimes the SQL query is just plain wrong. But you'll see that the LLM, depending on, you know, its understanding of the tools that you're sending, it will just go and try to autocorrect. And so in this situation, it was able to autocorrect, right? So you've got, hey, this error, it's saying that there is a column that I tried to go find, but it wasn't actually there. So let me try again. And ultimately, what we found here is that, okay, well, within the CloudTrail, I ultimately was able to do it. And I didn't actually have to keep asking the same question, saying, hey, you didn't do it right, just keep trying. And that's a component that is built within the notebook to say, hey, try in terms of a number of tries until you can get it correct in terms of reviewing the OCSF schema. And then now you're starting to look at, well, if you're looking at, hey, I looked at specific accounts that did create user or create access key, and I don't normally use users. That should be probably a red flag, right? And so now I might think about, well, who did it, right? With my account, who did it? Again, going through, it does have errors and does try to autocorrect, and ultimately is able to, everything that I'm actually looking through here, it's all generated via the LLM. And then ultimately found out that there were a number of accounts. I know who to look for. Looks like they're all admins. Again, can kind of go from there. So I can just kind of keep going through this. But ultimately, I just kind of want to see the value out here is, depending on how you're doing investigations, you could actually output this notebook and attach it to your investigation. You can do things in here like generate visualizations and actually have the LLM generate those visualizations that you can actually see within your notebook and output that. Things like bar charts, things like line, like diagrams in terms of correlation and so forth. That being said, again, want to make sure I get enough time to the Sentinel-1 team. Any kind of questions or anything that was confusing or any kind of follow-ups from the team?
All right, let's jump into some purple stuff. Cool. All right. let's go to next slide. So, to start the purple discussion, first, I'd like to highlight that what I'm going to talk about actually touches on a lot of the concepts that you just saw in Jonathan's presentation. Jonathan went really like under the covers in terms of how a large language model based security solution works. I'm going to take it up a level and talk a little bit more about use cases and what we built with Purple. But as I get deeper into some of the reference architecture, all of those same concepts and some other ones will show up. So these ideas of agents and notebooks and large language models and how you smartly prompt those large language models. There's a lot of parallels. Part of the reason for parallels is that Purple is built on AWS. And so we use a lot of the same services that Jonathan talked about. But in terms of customer motivation, Purple solves for a couple of different use cases. One being threat investigations, which is really, looking at your alerts and trying to understand their root cause and their scope of impact, but also threat hunting, which is a close cousin to threat investigations. Whereas with threat investigations, you're starting with an alert and investigating that specific alert to understand its cause and impact. With threat hunting, you're really starting with the things that have evaded detection. So either it didn't generate an alert or didn't generate a significant enough alert where it really slipped past your standard triage and investigation processes. And threat hunting is really an exercise in question asking. So you develop a hypothesis about a threat actor or a TTP or behavior that you're interested in looking at more closely to see if it is present in your environment. And then to assess that, you're asking a series of questions, ultimately with the goal of identifying a threat, mitigating it, and then converting that hunt, those questions that you're asking, into an automated rule that can then be set into autopilot and work in the background automatically. So, when we're talking about asking questions, this is, of course, what generative AI solutions makes much easier. You saw that a bit in Jonathan's demo. We'll show you more of that. But with generative AI solutions, you don't have to learn new query languages. You can ask questions in natural language, and the generative AI solution will convert it to a query language. So with Purple, which we just launched, is generally available about 2 weeks ago now. We have three major capabilities that we launched with, or three major pillars of capabilities that we launched with. This first one is this idea of using natural language to investigate and hunt for security risk. And so with Purple, you can ask questions in conversational English, and it will automatically convert those questions to our Power Query language, which is a SQL-like query language. Next, we are designed to go beyond just natural language translation and provide you with a number of other tools to really simplify both hunting and investigations. So we provide you hunting quick starts, which are like saved hunting starting points. We summarize the results of your queries. So if you do a query and get back 100 log lines, we'll distill that down into a nice 3-bullet summary. We also summarize individual indicators and events. So if you see a particular suspicious behavioral indicator, you can click down into it and get a nice, 1 or 2 paragraph summary of what's going on with that specific indicator. And then we also guide you through a hunt by providing you, the analyst, suggested next best questions. So Purple has contextual memory. It will remember your previous questions and the responses, and then based on that, suggest 1 to 3 next best questions that can help guide even more junior analysts through a hunt. And then lastly, we have a whole bunch of workflow capabilities that we think are unique and differentiated. One is actually the way that we use notebooks. So Notebook is not just a back-end feature for us. We actually expose those notebooks to customers so that they can save their hunts and investigations, share them with peers, and use them to train actually other analysts about what good hunts and investigations look like. Purple's also deeply integrated with our various commercial, open source, and proprietary threat intelligence feeds that are available to SentinelOne customers. It's also deeply integrated with our Singularity Data Lake. And similar to what Jonathan was talking about, we also leverage OCSF, the Open Cybersecurity Schema Framework, which is something that I worked on while at AWS, and now SentinelOne natively uses. In fact, I think the only two data lakes out there that natively use OCSF is Amazon Security Lake and the Singularity Data Lake here at SentinelOne. All right, let's go next slide. So as I was mentioning, Purple just launched generally available a couple of weeks ago, but we've been beta testing this with customers for the last 4 or 5 months. We beta tested it not only with our internal SOC and hunting teams here at SentinelOne, but with over 100 customers. And as part of that, we did some really rigorous data collection and surveying of those customers. And each week we collected information about how much time is Purple saving you and how much easier is it making hunting for your organization. And so the results were striking in that it was making customers 80% faster in their hunts and 128% easier hunting, meaning even for the more senior analysts that were doing hunts, it made them faster, and it allowed more junior analysts to take on hunting. One of the features that customers truly loved, 78% found it very or extremely helpful, was notebooks, and that's the way that we persistently save our hunts and investigations, or actually the way that you, the customer, saves your hunts and investigations. All right, next slide. In addition to that customer data that we collected, we've been running some interesting exercises internally, and now we're starting to expose this to customers. But we have some really cool capture the flag exercises that we use as part of workshops. And for our newest one, we actually ran a fun experiment in that we have a principal solution architect here who probably knows Power Query, our query language, better than anyone in the company. And we pitted him against 6 other solution architects, sort of more junior to mid-tier solution architects. The 6 more junior solution architects were able to use Purple as part of this capture the flag exercise. And Joel, the principal, was not. He just used regular Power Query. All 6 of the more junior analysts or solution architects that had access to Purple finished ahead of Joel. Unfortunately, Joel finished dead last, 7 out of 7. And so this was another fun way to really prove out the value of Purple. There's a lot of hype around generative AI, a lot of marketing hype. And but we feel that we've built something that actually adds real value, and we have the data to back it up. Okay, next slide. So, just to summarize some of the key parts of our value proposition with Purple, I mentioned Purple is built on top of our Singularity Data Lake. This is something that actually we acquired a few years ago now and is natively our back end for the Singularity platform. It features a modern log management architecture that separates compute and storage and allows us to just be a lot faster than other alternative solutions out there. We've benchmarked it against leading SIM type solutions, and we're 5 to 10 times faster, regardless of the data query size. And we can also store data longer. So we can store data in the Singularity Data Lake for up to a year, and actually even longer if you want to purchase our long-term query packages. I mentioned hunting quick starts. These are like essentially like saved hunting starting points or saved queries, but smart ones related to different types of hunts. We'll show you that in the demo. We'll also show you the notebooks and how those really go beyond the idea of a chatbot. I think that's another problem that I've seen with other generative AI solutions for security is that they essentially operate like a modern version of Clippy, in that there's sort of these ephemeral chatbots that follow you around in the console. Whereas like we've built something that creates persistent artifacts in the form of notebooks that can be used within your security operations workflows. All right. So let's go. So actually, let's pause on the design principles for just a minute. Okay. So we've taken a very thoughtful and prescriptive approach in terms of how we've built Purple, and it's grounded in a set of design principles. And these design principles are more than just words on paper for us. We actually make decisions around these. And one of the more important ones is transparency. And we think about transparency in multiple ways. One, from the user experience, we always make sure that Purple shows its work. Having built some AI solutions in the past, I've learned the hard way that if an AI system is a black box, customers aren't going to trust the results. So we've been trying to build Purple so that we've been transparent in the way that Purple does its work. If it's translating a natural language command to a Power Query, we show you the Power Query command that it used to do the analysis. If it brings in a third-party data source into the results, we will footnote that and show you where that data came from. But we also want to be transparent with how Purple works. It's actually one of the reasons we brought Jonathan on, because there's definitely some similarities between how Purple works and how Jonathan's approach works. But there's also some differences. So let me walk you through those. So let's go to the reference architecture. Yeah, so I'll walk through this really maybe with a quick example. So if I ask Purple a question, such as, am I being targeted by a particular threat actor like Fin12? The first thing that happens is that Purple will take that question and pass it to our agent framework, just like the agent framework that you saw in Jonathan's demo. Now, our agent framework is trained on a number of behaviors, such as natural language translation, next best question suggestions, auto summaries, etc. But we will take that question and we will semantically match it to information in our knowledge base. Now, this is one area where our architecture is a little bit different, or has an addition to it beyond what you saw in Jonathan's reference architecture. The knowledge base is a vector database that's loaded up with information from our documentation, like our user guide, technical support materials, our schema and syntax for our query language, also things like our blogs, the MITRE attack framework, open source, commercial, and proprietary intelligence feeds. This is all information stored in the knowledge base. And so we'll semantically match that question, am I being targeted at Fin12, to information in our knowledge base. And from that, we can learn that Fin12 has a certain set of IOCs and TTPs associated with it. And we can use that information to smartly prompt a large language model to generate the Power Query to go search the data lake for those IOCs and TTPs. I mentioned zero-shot prompting. We actually use few-shot prompting. So in that prompt, we'll also give examples of the types of queries that make sense. Also certainly prompt it with information about our schema and syntax. All this is designed to improve the accuracy of the response and reduce hallucinations. So by using the information in the knowledge base to do a better job at prompting, we provide better responses and less hallucinations than just going directly directly to the large language model for this information. Generative AI in a lot of cases is an exercise in smart prompt engineering. And that's what this knowledge base enables us to do. So once we have created that Power Query, once the large language model has created the Power Query for us, and we've executed against the data lake, we actually then run those results through a statistical model to help summarize them. We use this information in the summary we generate, and we also generate the follow-on questions as part of this process. All of this is regionally isolated so that your data doesn't leak across regions. And we built it with a swappable LLM architecture. So we actually use a variety of LLMs, including ones powered by Bedrock, in this architecture. And we basically picked the best LLM for the specific agent behavior that we're asking it to do. And we've tested all the LLMs across different behaviors.
All right. Hey, Eli, question. Yeah. This is awesome because this adds a lot of different components. In terms of responses that you're kind of evaluating, looking at the knowledge base, how are y'all, I guess, identifying confidence scores in terms of results that are provided to, I guess, whoever is using Purple AI to say, oh, hey, I didn't really like the response, or I mean, is that something that y'all have encountered or?
Yeah. So we're taking customer feedback both directly and indirectly. And by that, I mean, so if a customer doesn't like the response that we give them, there's ability to press a thumbs down button, and that actually automatically creates a ticket for our on-call AI engineer to go investigate whether we can improve the prompt or whether we need to add additional data source into our knowledge base to give a better answer. We also look for more indirect patterns. So if we see a customer continuously trying to rephrase a question, we'll actually capture that as an implied thumbs down as another way of continuously improving the system. We are introducing some new behaviors into the system where if the confidence levels aren't high enough, we'll actually have Purple ask you clarification questions. That's something new that we're working on now. All right, let's see here. I think maybe, do we have one more slide? Yeah. So, this one flows from the reference architecture. We do a number of things to keep your data secure and private, in terms of information that you're inputting into Purple. But, a key thing to remember is that, the information that we're passing to the LLM is information that you're putting into the questions that you're asking Purple. Like all of your logs stay in our data lake. So we're not passing like all of your logs into the LLM, really passing information that you're asking Purple into the LLM. But for any downstream LLM that we use, including Amazon Bedrock, we have sub-processing agreements where they're not allowed to store that information. They're not allowed to use it to improve their models. They're not allowed to share it with any third parties. We also have put in place a proxy architecture. So in that reference architecture diagram, actually before the question even goes to the agent framework, it passes through a proxy architecture that's looking for any suspicious types of questions that might be used to try to jailbreak the system or that are just against our usage policies. All right, so let's jump into a quick demo so you can see this all in action, and I'll turn it over to Mike.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jonathan and Eli. And I'll pivot right into the Purple AI front end and just touch on some of the questions. Thank you for those in the Q&A as well. The Power Queries that we'll show right now in the demo that we'll see are integral to SentinelOne's data lake, providing analytical search functions against data in our data lake. And of course, we'll do that with natural language, as Eli mentioned. They may provide a launchpad, so if there are use cases outside of SentinelOne's data lake, that would be an opportunity to take some of the insights and questions and things that are prompted, and then maybe do some custom development outside of that. So hopefully that sort of jives from the demo as well. So when we first pull up Purple AI for maybe new or junior analysts, or as an entry launch pad, Eli, as you mentioned, will be given some prompts, and I'm able to select some different areas like threat actions or TTPs or IOCs, or even drill into anomalies. And it'll give some static prompts here to help me start a hunt. If I don't necessarily know exactly what I want to ask, I do have a natural language prompt at the bottom where I can freehand type in. So one example I like to use, I think is pretty powerful. Here's one that's PowerShell connections to IPs outside of the US. And so whether I enter that manually in the search bar at the bottom, or whether I select the quick prompt, it's going to take my natural language question right here, which I can modify. And it's going to develop what we call a power query. This is a syntactical search format. And we'll see we have a bunch of operators where we're filtering on event types and outgoing, and we're looking at PowerShell, and we're doing things like geo-IP country based on destination IP address, ultimately developing a column of events that we can view. So very specifically using Purple AI, we're able to develop this analytical search, this syntactical search, without having to actually write or code this search, which has always been troublesome with data lakes in general over the past many years. We saw that run very quickly, and as I scroll down, we see a table of results that come back populated in a nice table format for me. I can open that Power Query itself to pivot to the data lake and view. I can easily do a nice time chart graph here as well of the results. And out of those results, I'm able to pivot down directly into one of the events. That'll pop up a nice sort of overview of the event on the side. I'll have the key value pairs, which I can start to use to hunt further and look at the raw data. But also really nicely, Purple AI has done a nice SOC analyst report for me. It's actually interrogated the data of this log event and given me insights into what executable is actually running. It'll map, as you mentioned, Eli, pulling down threat intelligence and things like that, mapping it to, in this case, reconnaissance indicators. It'll dissect IP addresses and then ports and give me some really good information as an analyst to pivot to and continue my interrogation. It'll see the user that it's running as. And if there's, for example, like MITRE framework or things like that, that would all show here for me. So giving me a very nice SOC analyst readout without actually having to develop that myself. Further, when we go down, we'll see out of these results, I've been given a nice overall report out of the information that we see. So we'll see the primary connections in this case, because we asked destinations outside of the United States, we'll see connections to Germany and UAE. We'll see one of the largest users identified right here and associated with Hammers and Shalit with frequent connections. As part of that cyclical feedback loop that you mentioned, we can thumbs up, thumbs down, and give very specific feedback. Maybe if this is not the result set that we wanted, or maybe something was misinterpreted, or frankly just didn't serve our needs, we're able to give some feedback here. What's better yet, even after all of that, we were prompted with follow-up questions. So maybe we know that we see connections from PowerShell to countries outside of the US, but this could take us further and say, maybe you want to drill into high-risk countries, or are there specific users? So we can actually follow up these questions and work off of the result sets that we see here. That'll build out the search. It'll append to this. Again, we have the natural language question and the resulting question formulated for us here. Again, the ability to pivot down into this newer, smaller subset of data and continue to iterate over and drill down to the end result set that we're after. In the end, what's great is there's a few things available. So one, we can take response actions on these as we had a result set there. We can also, as you mentioned, Eli, this is shared in a notebook framework. So everything that we see from the genesis where I asked the first question through the answers that came back, the result sets, and my subsequent, these are actually saved as a notebook. I can share this notebook. I can rename it. And if I just fly out on the left-hand side, we'll see my notebooks where I'm able to go ahead and create these and then share these with my team. So Eli, for example, if you tasked me and said, hey, Mike, I need you to start to look at these IP connections, and I need you to do some analytical reports, and I need some answers. I can take that away and say, sure, Eli, awesome, here we go. Here's everything that I ran. Here's the results set. Here are the insights that I'm seeing. This is maybe a pivot to a deeper search that we'll do. But yet I can share that back with you and the team, and you'll have this persistent so that you can go back, whether that's tomorrow or next week, to see the work that Mike did and then share that back with you. So that's a very brief, high-level overview of a lot of the key functions and importantly, the key differentiators that we see out of this phenomenal natural language processing that we've built on top of our data lake. Eli, I'll turn it back over to you, sir.
Thanks so much. All right, so I think we want to close things out here with just a little bit of build versus buy discussion with Jonathan and I. Jonathan's open source project could be the foundation for building something yourself, whereas what you saw with Purple is available in the market today. So maybe, Jonathan, I'll kick it over to you first. Like, what do you see as the key considerations from like the build perspective as to whether it makes sense to build?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, from that perspective, it's really this idea of what are you trying to accomplish in the sense of increasing security posture, right? Are you trying to reduce the number? I mean, let's say your organization is looking at something like our Security Hub score is way too low. How do we increase that, right? And so how do I reduce the number of findings without really making sure that I am just trying to archive findings because I want to reduce the number of findings, right? So how do I find the component of really understanding where those findings are, right? So like depending on that use case, right, this threat hunting capability is great, right? But maybe depending on how I need to tune that, how I need to use either different tools, different agents from that perspective, or this other component of, let's say, I've got a number of playbooks that I've already created, right? And I want to use that as my own kind of knowledge base, right? Using RAG or some other mechanism to make recommendations for internal playbooks that I've got. So in those various situations, right, and being able to say, hey, I've got a specific understanding in terms of using generative AI solutions, right? Because I won't paint a rosy picture. It can be difficult if there is no aspect in terms of, or limited understanding in terms of how to use these open source tools like LangChain. Now, as generative AI becomes more prevalent and things become more open source, like the solution that I shared earlier, you'll start seeing it's similar to getting more inept in Python. Right? I remember my first time in Python. I knew very little, but as those examples came out, I started becoming more proficient. So all of that in kind of in lieu is, well, now I also need to control how my data moves, who's accessing to review what, and then adding additional guardrails or safeguards in terms of my solution. So I would say the biggest thing is really you've got to have the personnel to be able to support that, right? Or kind of get security folks a little bit more on the data science side, right? Being comfortable with things like notebooks to work in, like interacting with prompts with large language models and things of that nature.
Yep. Cool. That all makes sense. I think on the flip side of that, in terms of, licensing or buying a generative AI solution for security, which by the way, we've been calling an AI security analyst here at SentinelOne, the benefits of that are probably pretty straightforward, in that you're getting something right out of the box that works. You don't need to fine tune it. You don't need to build it. And AI engineering expertise is not needed. Really, you just need to, be a security analyst that can ask it questions. You don't need to be a data scientist or data engineer. One other consideration is that, and actually I saw some questions that came in along this line. Can Purple work on data in the Amazon Security Lake? Like, can you conduct Power Queries against the Amazon Security Lake? At this point, no. I mean, Purple is really designed to only sit on top of the Singularity data lake. And so, it's, I guess maybe one qualification to that is the Singularity data lake and the Amazon Security Lake are integrated. So we're both using OCSF. We can pull in logs from ASL into Singularity data lake. And so, we can certainly query the logs associated with AWS or even other vendors' platforms, but it's really designed to work on top of the SentinelOne platform.
Yeah, and one thing I like to add to that, Eli, is on the slide is really total cost of ownership, right? There is this component in terms of the notebooks that you saw within the open source, right? All of the things that were in Eli's architecture, there is documents in terms of how to build them, right? So if you've got expertise already within the organization, you've got more expertise in terms of how to kind of integrate and build it to tailor it to your use case. But it does take time, right? Building it, securing it, making sure you are leveraging kind of AWS best practices, all kind of things to keep in mind for any cloud native solution for that matter.
Awesome. Well, I think that pretty much wraps it up. Molly, are there any other questions that came in that we want to tackle now?
Just one for Jonathan that I think is pretty interesting. And that's really, what are some other ways that customers use machine learning or generative AI to increase security?
Yeah, no, that's a good one, right? What we saw in this example from looking at the open source solution was, well, how do I help threat hunting? Another mechanism is being able to understand, correlate, and look at, well, you saw in the example, I've got 1.6 million findings. How do I prioritize? What do I go look at to reduce the fatigue on my SOC analysts, right? Because there's another component of, yes, you are faster using generative AI in terms of something like a comprehensive chatbot. But the other component is, well, how also can I reduce the noise? Did I, enable a config rule where now I've rolled out something within something like Systems Manager, and that's now just creating tons and tons of findings that I'm just marking as false positive, right? And so using generative AI and machine learning tools, you can actually use to kind of reduce the noise, right? Really understand, why am I getting these security findings and alerts, so you can spend more time doing things like threat hunting and identifying vulnerabilities. So there's, as Security Hub grows, and Eli knows this really well, is that there's a lot of integrations and findings. Well, now you've got just this component of, well, I've got security findings all over the place, and that's just within AWS. As most organizations, you've got a multi-cloud architecture, that number can just grow. So doing that to do things like reduce alert fatigue as well.
Cool.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Awesome. Yeah, so I think that's it. And that's really all the time we have today. But you can definitely follow up with these guys on LinkedIn and reach out to us if you have any more questions. And we'll include Jonathan's blog post in our follow-up so that you can read that as well, and as well as a demo link to get a personalized demo of Purple AI. So look out for that in your inbox. But thank you so much for joining, and thank you to our wonderful speakers today.
Thanks so much.